What is your duty? To serve the Emperor's will. What is the Emperor's will? That is my hand.
So can you feel the phrase through the visor? Fight for Imperium. If you never wanna bow, better rise up. Show us the awareness. I feel every bone I'm breaking. So I'm taking. If I die, we already won. Put my life on the line for Imperium. For Imperium. I can't spend another second craving better days. I'll shred my skin down to the bone so I can get away and leave the blood of all my brothers as a barricade. I really hate the way I caused it. Might is never right, but I train just like I want it to be. Hate the human in the eyes I see across from me. I'll break another mirror cause I'll never see it clear. I hate to drown the fear. Trust in the Emperor to bend the planet's lost and innocent. We are crusaders in the flesh. Our justice stands. So can you feel the rays through the visor? Fight for Imperium. If you never wanna bow, better rise up. Show us the awareness. I feel every bone I'm breaking. So I'm taking. If I die, we already won. Put my life on the line for Imperium. For Imperium. Age too dark, so now I kill for the light. My comrades save my bulls that I fight. This chaos force you move or you die. But never hide in the hive. Blackout. I see the stars through the ceremony. Crash out and let the part of me that's terrified back out. I trust the light and the steel. Can't go back now. I can't go back now. Trust in the Emperor to bend the planet's lost and innocent. We are crusaders.
And we are live. Hello, all you BC WrestlePod nerds out there, and welcome to a very special edition here at BC WrestlePod on this Veterans Day. I am your host, Mikey, and joined with me this evening is my homies, Adolfo and Macho. Both of them are here. I'm super excited. I'm really excited because just to give you a little bit of background, this has been in the works for quite some time now. And, originally we were going to do this earlier, but reasons kind of made us switch things around. But we are here this evening to do a very special edition of BC WrestlePod, in which we are going to be talking about just representation in wrestling, in life in general. It's going to be fun, but I'm not going to give all the details away. But I am super excited. This is going to be great. I'm going to do my little intro bit here. at our YouTube, Twitch, conglomeration network syndicate thing that we got going on. You can follow us all over the social medias on the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. We have a Patreon. You can follow all our social medias by downloading the Next Level app, where everything is nicely neat and packaged for you. We also have new merchandise that dropped today. We have 2 different designs added to the collection. The Timeless Connect collection, which is an ode to a very certain timeless wrestler in the women's division of All Elite Wrestling. And then, of course, given the craziness that has happened the last week or so, we also have a Fight with Your All You Got collection. If you want more details about that, go check out the design and you'll see what I mean. But for once, I am not in the lead seat tonight. I actually get to be a part of the panel. I get to be kind of in the co-hosting seat, but I'm going to tag in our lead for tonight. So Macho, I'm going to tag you in. And why don't you give us a little bit more detail of what's about to go down tonight for the audience?
Okay, so thank you guys so much for joining me for this podcast. I think it's great. I love that we were able to start a conversation in another way, and then it swayed over to making this type of podcast. I think this is going to be a really good one, guys, because I think it's a conversation that I realize that people are afraid to have. People actually will steer away from this conversation. They don't like to have it, and I feel like it's important to talk about diversity and representation in professional wrestling, whether that be your nationality or just you as a human being. I think it's definitely something that we can all attest to, being that we're all Latino men and we, want to be able to represent ourselves and our cultures and our families. So I'm excited to be able to have that. We have 3 different states right now. So, I believe we have Jersey, California, and Pennsylvania right now, right?
Yep.
Yep. I mean, technically I am from Jersey. So, the fact that I'm stuck in Pennsylvania, whatever. But anyway, yeah. But yeah, I definitely thought it was important to talk about the representation because I'm seeing it lack in professional wrestling, which is something that we all typically talk about first. Like, if you notice, me and Mikey have had this conversation. I would say for the past 2 months, we've been having it privately in text chains where wrestling as a whole, it looks like it's going backwards with all of their champions, right? And up until recently, I realized that with that Bianca and Jade, specifically them, that they were, I don't know if anybody's a fan of The Office, but it felt like their tag titles were like the assistant to the regional manager. Like they were just like, oh yeah, you know what? Here's some titles to just appease this demographic of fan. And now they've done a phenomenal job and they've become, I think, the most important women's champions in that company. But, it's not without their hard work. It's not without their promo ability and what they've been able to do in the ring. We've seen it most recently with someone like Bobby Lashley, a Latino, an Afro-Latino man who had to leave the company to be able to showcase the entirety of his character that was kind of stripped away from him and kind of made a joke in the big promotion that he was in. And I know we're going to touch on some wrestlers that are of Latino background here that people might not know about. I believe that's going to be important. But before we jump right into it, I wanted to hear from both of you guys. If you guys could just tell me why you believe that this conversation is important to have. Like maybe Adolfo, maybe you can go first.
Well, especially in light of, the recent event, I'll just go straight for the throat. And, in light of recent elections here in the U.S., that diversity has been a very hot button topic, and yeah, it's been such a climb to get the type of representation that we've been wanting to get in wrestling, in media, et cetera, and not just your stereotypical accepted representation, which if I'll get into that later a little in depth, but we've worked so hard to to get here. And you're right. Like in the last 2 months or so, it feels like there's been a backslide, you know. So this the voices need to be heard regarding this. So that's why I'm definitely excited to talk about this, and be able to like unfilter myself, because that's something else. Like not to veer too far off topic, but like as a Latino male in a predominantly white culture, like quite often I have had to like filter myself, to make it like acceptable, you know. Um, so to be able to have this, to be able to take the filters off, and speak our piece so that our voices can be heard, it's an important thing.
Yeah, I agree. Mikey, what do you think?
I'm kind of in the same vein as Adolfo, but where I come from with all of this is a couple of different things. I think as someone who is leading a organization in some capacity here at BC WrestlePod, as the boss, if you will, I've made sure that the crew and the company that we keep is very diverse and also very open-minded to it. But I think this conversation is important for multiple reasons, which we'll touch upon in here, through this conversation. But I think for me too, it's more so I'm taking an approach of educating individuals who may or may not be aware of this too. And I know the not argument, but the conversation that is usually had is that, oh, it's professional wrestling. It's just like, why it shouldn't be this steeped in like these issues like don't matter, but it kind of does, especially in 2024 where we're having the next generation of wrestling fans, kids and teens growing up who may or may not be getting into wrestling for the first time, or are growing up in households where, the parents or whoever or grandparents or aunties and uncles, like abuelos, abuelas, like whoever is in that household might be a longtime wrestling fan, and this is part of like what they do as a family. I take it from the standpoint of like where those kids, and also too, because of my job, I always keep my students in the back of my mind. It was like, when they get older, when they decide to do things, especially the few students that I have that are major wrestling fans, I want them to be able to look at the landscape, regardless of what company they watch, and be like, hey, I see myself in this individual like I did when I was younger in my cartoons, where I was like the Proud Family and things like that. I was like, maybe not necessarily the same as me, but I see somebody who is of similar complexion to me. So that's where I always come from this. And I think this is an important conversation to have because for some reason, people don't want to talk about it. And as one of the, at least to my knowledge, one of the few places that has melanated individuals in the, wrestling review landscape of things too, I think it's important to educate our other constituents about, this is our viewpoint. We love professional wrestling as much as the next person, but we also have to keep these different things in the back of our minds when we review and watch professional wrestling because, we understand the plight of many of the wrestlers who are, people of color or part of marginalized groups. So this is going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I love a lot of what you guys said there. I think it's very important to also state that professional wrestling isn't just one race. A lot of different cultures, a lot of different backgrounds provide professional wrestling for a lot of different countries. Like we have wrestlers that are Indian and like that. They're just very, very good wrestlers, right? We have people that are Mexican. Like the Mexican culture in lucha libre, it's a part of their culture. Like here in the United States, like I mean, even now in 2024, like we still get labeled as nerds. Like how do you like that shit, right? But in Mexican culture, it's kind of like I once read Bruce Lee's book where he talks about like when he grew up in his country, he said that learning martial arts was a part of it was a way of life. Like that was a part of their school. That's kind of what it feels like from Mexican culture. Like lucha libre is important. Like we do that as a family here. It's like here in the United States, the closest thing you can adapt it to is like Texas, right? So Texas loves football. And every Friday night, the town shuts down so they can go watch high school football together. Like that's the same thing it is for us in our cultures. And I think it's important for people to note that professional wrestling, although you may think it's a scripted show, and it is, and you may see it as like fake and anything like that, it matters to people. And it's one of those things where it's super important. And a lot of our people have to hide themselves that aren't able to actually show themselves. Like we just learned, we spoke about him right before we went live here, about Matt Taven. None of us knew that he was a Latino man until, Latino Heritage Month. And then he like just told everybody on AEW's page that he grew up like in a Puerto Rican household. Right. And you're just like, wow, like what's going on here? Right. We learned through the interview, like I think it was like 5 years ago, about Karrion Kross. Like he doesn't do it. And Karrion Kross has been like attacked for this, where people have asked, like, why not use your culture as a part of your character? And he said, because it's never called for it. Now he's not hiding it. He's not actively running away from it. He's very proud to be Latino. He's actually liked a couple of my tweets where I've said things like, you represent us really well, like things like that. And he's actually liked them and said, thank you, like in Spanish, gracias, papi, like things like that, where you could tell he's proud of where he comes from. He's proud of his, abuelita and stuff like that. But there are people that we will touch on here that actively hide their Latino and their Hispanic background because they chose career over showcasing, to the masses, hey, this is who I am, that I believe would actually benefit him in a long run, as well as showcase a culture that's never really had a star from that specific Latino country. But, we'll touch on that as well later on in the show. But the one thing that I wanted to ask you guys is, what does it feel like to you when you have that oh so too obvious quote said to you when you tell someone you're Puerto Rican and they tell you, oh, you don't look Puerto Rican, right? Now, my abuelita taught me when she was still alive, she taught me, she's like, this is what I want you to say from now on. She said, whenever somebody says this to you, you tell them, am I supposed to look like a bowl of rice and beans? What do you think a Puerto Rican looks like? Like that was her way of telling me to break the ice, to be a smartass to that person, but at the same time, like kind of be like, hey, I'll take it as a joke. Here's a joke for you. But what does it feel to you to have someone question your ethnicity just based on the way you look? Mikey, I'll start with you.
So I have an interesting experience when it comes to this. So, I mean, the BC WrestlePod boys and Alice know this about me, but I am 100% Latino, but I am mixed. I am not one way or the other. I am Puerto Rican and I'm also Mexican too, because, mom's Mexican, dad is Puerto Rican, mom's from here, dad is from back east in New York. So I understand both sides of the coin. As far as like physical appearance wise, I always get, not the part that that's part of it, but where I have an interesting experience and where it makes it tough for me is sometimes here in, here in, visiting Puerto Rico as well. For me, I'm just like, I've had some interactions with individual, because for those of you that know the Latin culture, I mean, we three understand this. There are some individuals out there where if you're not 100% of either or, then you are viewed as less than. And while thankfully that's not have been the majority of my interactions when I go visit family in Mexico or in Puerto Rico, there are the few interactions that me and my younger brother have where, because we are mixed, we are seen as less than in the culture itself, which is interesting. But I think the thing that kind of not necessarily bothers me the most, but it's more so, and kind of taking to what Adolfo said earlier about like unfiltering myself. It bothers me the fact that I'm Latino, but I'm also educated, and that's always a surprise to people. I'm like, what? I can't be brown and educated? Like, what is that supposed to mean? And it just frustrates me because I worked my butt off to get to where I am today in the career that I am doing. And it bothers me that someone who looks like me can't be educated and have a vocabulary that's not slang or other things like that. That's what bothers me the most. So that's been my experience. So I get it from here, from people in the States, but I also get it within my two cultures that I am very proud of as well. So it's like being poked from all sides, if you will. It's been an interesting ride so far.
Mm-hmm. Adolfo, what about you?
So, and I'm gonna do my best not to ramble because this is a hot topic for me. Nowadays,
go ahead.
Nowadays, it pisses me off. Like your abuela said, like, I want to shoot back. Oh, I gotta look like a bowl of fuck, arroz con habichuelas, but like, I won't say that nice. I will say that ready to, throw it out nowadays. The reason why is because my family, we came from Puerto Rico in the early 80s. And we moved to Massachusetts, like smack middle, Irish Italian. We were that demographic in the town, right? And I am the youngest in my family. My brothers and my sister all have 10 years on me. And when they came over, they were already in junior high and high school. And, again, this was the early 80s. So down on the island, English was not taught as prevalent as it is now. Right. So for them, yes, English was a second language, and the same for my parents. So there was a very radical culture shock. And growing up, I saw my brothers and my sister, the racist attacks on them, the racist attacks on my house, the number of nights that our windows got busted, and like people did property damage, the young at the time, the young punk kids, because there were brown people in the neighborhood. Like I watched that. I grew up with that, but my father, he always told me to, turn the other cheek, and because I was so young, my parents really instilled in me, to survive, you have to fit in. So I didn't have a rejection of my Puerto Ricanness, but, it was something I had to hide, So growing up, when that, the first thing, oh, what's your name? Adolfo. Oh, that's a exotic name. Where's that from? I'm Puerto Rican. Then comes the evidence. Oh, you don't look Puerto Rican, and my whole life, I just like laughed it off. Oh yeah. In my young adult life, it became a butt of jokes, me being Puerto Rican, but I'm not one of those Puerto Ricans, I'm a okay Puerto Rican. And it just really stoked, just this anger inside of me that, again, like I kept pushing down, but now I'm at a place in my life that no, I'm Puerto Rican, So you can, get the D, okay? Because that's who I am, and I will tell you who I am, and I will be loud and proud. You know, and yeah, it's from that history, So
Yeah, I mean, I've had this similar situation. I actually, the field that I work in, which I'll touch on a little bit later when we talk about that one wrestler, um, the first interaction I had with my boss was, you don't work like a typical Puerto Rican. And I was like, what's that? And he's like, lazy. And I was like, well, shit. I mean, I mean, my uncle lives on the island and he owns his own plumbing and electrician company. And you know who's the most popular man on the island when hurricanes come? My uncle JR. And my dad worked for Porky Products in Carteret, New Jersey. And he was a truck driver his whole life. And, then became a dispatcher. And, nobody ever questioned his, work ethic. And here I am living somewhere where what I do for a living, you actually think that there's questions. Like I've never heard that before. I mean, you think about the people, like you hear things like that, and I've definitely heard that, like you said, oh, you're not one of those. That's definitely like a strange thing. For me, it's always a shock. It always comes as a shock to people, the disrespect that people give you when you tell them you're Latino and then they question you being Latino. Like I remember, just a short story. I remember I was working in Harrisburg, and I was working, and this person comes up to the counter to ask me for something, and they could barely speak English. Like it was just predominantly Spanish, but I could tell they weren't Puerto Rican, right? So they were definitely from like a Dominican background or something like that. But it doesn't matter because growing up in Jersey, yeah, we grew up with our own dialect. Puerto Ricans Spanish is the worst Spanish of all. It's broken. That's just how we speak. That we understand each other. But I can understand Dominicans because I grew up with Dominicans. There was a lot of them all over the island, and I grew up and went to school over there. So like that's my first language. And I remember like telling him without embarrassing him, just being like, "Hey, would it be easier for you if I spoke to you in Spanish?" And his immediate reaction was like to call me gringo. Like, "Oh, are you gonna, are you gonna use your, like your Rosetta Stone?" And I'm thinking like, I like look around to make sure there's nobody listening because I'm like, all right, I work for a white company. Nobody knows the fuck I'm saying. And I tell him right away, I'm like, mira, pendejo, like, yo entiendo español. You know what I mean? Like, and I told him just like that. And he knew immediately when I said that, immediately when I called him what I called him, I had a fear inside, but I was angry, right? And he immediately goes, "Oh my God, you're Puerto Rican," right away. Just because of what I said, because I was able to be so real and like that way with him. And he talked to me like normal, but it took for me to be like rude. Like he needed that from me to make sure that I wasn't just somebody who's going to use like high school Spanish as a way to communicate with you. And that's typically what needs to happen. And that's kind of like Mikey, you talk about like not being accepted from your own culture. Like like people that look at you like, oh, you're half and half. Like I've had this conversation, like one of my best friends, Rochelle, she's light skinned. And she told me that growing up in Baltimore, that because she's a light skinned Black woman, she said a lot of the people in Baltimore treated her like she was less than. And I had never heard that from that cultural background. I thought that was just my culture. I thought because when I went to school in Puerto Rico, like that's the first place I went to school. When I was there, they were like, "Oh, your dad es de allá afuera," right? Because that's what they say over there. They don't even say like, "Oh, he's from Jersey," like he lives in Jersey. It's like, "Oh, de allá afuera," and then they immediately thought like, "Oh, I'm just a white boy who's here to visit." Right. So I wasn't treated like I was actually treated like I was less than as well in school. Like that's how it was. And it sucks like to have these type of experiences. But once they realize like, hey, you're not here just to like, kind of feed into a little bit of the culture, you're actually a part of the cultural background. You know what I mean? Like this is one of those things where I feel like they're way more accepting now. And I got to be honest with you, I living in Toa Baja, Puerto Rico, like I got to tell you, when I moved to Union City, New Jersey, I felt more accepted in Union City, New Jersey as a Puerto Rican than I did living in Toa Baja. And my abuela, that I already mentioned once in the show, we owned a bodega, medio peso. Like that was ours. Like everybody knew my grandmother. I went to Walt Disney World with my son for his 3rd birthday. And my wife is like, she's like, can you go inside this coffee shop, right? And get me something. And there was somebody, I don't know if you've ever been to Disney, but they have on their name badges, they have like where you're from, right? Like whatever part of the world you're from. And this said Toa Baja, Puerto Rico. And I was like, oh, I'm from Toa Baja. And I was talking to them, and then they were like, oh, what part are you from? As soon as I said Barrio Ingenio, he goes, tu abuela no es Angie, right? Like, how did I meet someone in Florida that knew my grandmother? Like, that's wild. You know what I mean? Like, it's just it's one of those things where I feel like it's definitely more accepting here than it is over there. But I feel like it's because we all feel like we're in the same like group. Like no one else wants to accept us, so we immediately accept each other, right? You know, like I think that's just one of those things where we want to be able to like look at us right now. We're having this conversation because we all felt it was important. Nobody else is going to have this conversation for us, right? Like I told Mikey earlier today, like I learned in the very beginning of BLM that if you wait for one of your friends from that background to ask for help, like you're already too late. Like you need to help before they ask. You need to step up for them, right? And that's kind of what we're doing here. We're stepping up for our background. We're stepping up for our people. And I wanted to broach on another subject because I feel like this is an intense subject. So I feel like it might actually bring out some strong feelings from both of you. But how do you feel when you see someone of Latino culture get the opportunity and then you have a conversation with someone that's not from our background and they tell you, well, I wish that they wouldn't do that just so they can get someone like that in that spot, and they would just go with the best person? Because I've had some intense conversations with people that I care about that actually feel like this is an appropriate thing to say out loud. You know, how do you feel, Mikey, we'll start with you. How do you feel when someone tells you like, oh, it should always be the best person for the job instead of actually, you know, this person?
Oh boy. Macho, if it's okay, I'm actually going to have Adolfo go first because me and Adolfo have had this conversation before too. And I want Adolfo to go first because he has some very, very, very good takes. Adolfo, I'm gonna let you go ahead.
Just a tip, Mikey. Just a tip. There we go. To fill a quota. I hate that. Oh my God. So frustrating because again, like my early juvenile to like early adult life that was always tossed in my face was, oh, we need to fill a quota. Oh, we need to fill a quota. You know, even when I started going into my my early adult career, you know, that was tossed around like a joke. You know, oh yeah, we hired you because we need to fill a quota. It's like, and yeah, it's where do you get off thinking that that's even all right to like to joke about? You know, I'm not sitting here saying how you know, your drunken like non-existent life, oh, but you're still here, so like, you know, you're filling a quota. You know, it's like yeah, no, that was, it is very frustrating. You know, and it's always been super frustrating, you know, my entire life, if you can't tell. The I have seen the other side of that though, where, you know, someone of a nationality, of a race, what have you, was hired, and they lived that statement, oh, I'm here because I'm filling the quota, so that in turn we had to work doubly as hard for them, doubly as hard to cover them, like sliding, so there is also that side of it that's like that's also been frustrating, like I I'm not a scholarly man at all. Dare I say I'm a knuckle dragger, right? Um and I can see in the beginning why the whole, the whole, like, the diversity hire and this, that, the other, to fill a quota thing, like why that started. I can see why that happened, and I understand, and I understand that the intention was probably a good intention, but it just, people have taken that and have grabbed onto that and have been able to, like, toss that back in our faces, you know, um, where now it's like a joke on itself, and it's super frustrating. It's super angering to me. Uh, you know, um, if the world was perfect, yeah, the best human that could do the job would get the job, but because of the way, because of the way capitalism is, especially here in the United States, that's not the way it rolls, So we had to take our wins where we could with the whole, the diversity hire thing, but then it backfired, and it's just like, so it's, it's frustrating. I hate that. I hate it when that gets tossed in my face, and I doubly hate it when I turn around and someone is living that stereotype. It's like, are you for real right now? Really? So, yeah. Go ahead, Mikey.
So my approach is in the same lane, but I take a different route with it because my world of existence is in the world of academia and education. So something that my mom has instilled in me, and this was also my grandma too, both of them instilled in me, and it wasn't necessarily to, dash my hopes and dreams for what I want to be when I grow up and things like that. But both my grandma and my mom taught me and my younger brothers, you are going to have to work 3 times as hard as your other constituents in order to get maybe a third of the same results as they would. And what that means is, in the world that I do, I work as an educator. I am a teacher and I love it. That is the career path that I chose. And that's what, I've worked my entire early 20s, or my 20s, I should say, going to school, getting educated, all that stuff. So that way I can do what I do now. But I have to work, and my journey getting there, I had to constantly prove that I got hired based on my skills and my merits, and not because, of the color of my melanated skin, if you will. I'm a little less vocal than maybe say Adolfo, and maybe in certain cases you, Macho. Both of you know me very well. I'm very laid back. I'm very even keeled. I don't try to let a lot of things get under my skin, but that's because I have adopted the adage that, I decided to go with what my grandma and my mom taught me is that I have to work 3 times as hard to get at least a third of the results as my other constituents, but I let my work ethic and everything speak for itself, and what I call making moves in silence. Because growing up, my parents my mom and dad tried to provide every opportunity for me and my younger brother, and they hustled with everything they had to make sure that we were given those opportunities to pursue the things that we want. And so even in my adult life, as Adolfo and the other BC WrestlePod boys knows, my adage is that I make moves in silence where people are saying things, people are doing things. I am not blind and I am not dumb to the obstacles that are in my way to break through into this. And speaking not just in the world of academia, but speaking about being a wrestling centric like entity on the internet, because we're not the only ones doing this. I am not blind to those things of just not being new to the scene, but also being a group of individuals that happens to also be melanated in parts of the queer community as well with some of our folks here. So I understand, but I really hate that, it doesn't matter. I can be hired for my merits. I could be hired for to fill a quota, but regardless, it's like no matter what side people choose, it always ends up being such a negative thing to us, which frustrates me to no end because I'm like my skill set should speak for themselves. But because it's not going the way that you want to, then you want to bring up, oh, you're filling a quota. And my response to that is like, and apparently you weren't doing the job well enough, so they had to bring me on. But even then, I don't want to adopt that too, because then that opens the door for people to just be absolutely ruthless and assassinate my character based on, my culture, my background, my ethnicity, my social creed, all that stuff. So it's literally walking through any world that I find myself in the space of, having to walk carefully to make sure I don't set off any landmines or allow people to treat my existence as cannon fodder to whatever insecurities or needs that they feel to be. Yes, I said that. I'm standing my ground on that. That is where I stand when it comes to that type of thing.
Yeah, I love what both of you said there. I too also come from a different angle. But we all come to the same, resolution here is I can't be I am very much that person that you like I can't use like this big word bank. So like fuck is a part of my normal language, right? You know what I mean? Like
Right.
that's just how I talk. And so
Yeah.
I just want to be clear, like when it comes to diversity hires, as they say, I don't give a fuck. You know why? Because I was taught something as someone who grew up in a household that had my mother, my sister, my Aunt Judy, my Aunt Flower, my Aunt Marina, my abuela. That means that I was the only male there, right? So I got to watch these women knock at opportunities and be very good at what they did. I watched my mother struggle to become top in her nursing home because she's a woman and they wanted to give that job to a man. I watched my Aunt Judy work at Northwest Airline. I don't even know if that's still an airline, but I watched her work there, knock at the opportunity. My Aunt Flower, retired Navy engineer. I had to watch her like struggle to move up the ranks. My Aunt Marina works in the church. My Aunt Marina is, if you guys watch Big Bang Theory or Young Sheldon, she's Mary Cooper. That's what my Aunt Marina is. She works at the church, and that's what she does. I watch all these women knock at the opportunity. So when I look at it, I think of that time in my life. So if someone who is a person of color gets an opportunity that they wouldn't normally get the opportunity for, and it is specifically labeled as a diversity hire, I look at it as, well, the reason this system is in place is because they wouldn't typically get this opportunity unless this system was in place. I always tell this story because I've had this conversation with my buddy Tyler, that I used to work for Pepsi, which is a global company, right? And when I left the company, I became friends with people from other areas of Pepsi, not just the plant I worked in. But I left the company and went back to doing my job that I was that I was good at, that I've been doing since I was 17 years old. And I remember having a conversation, and this guy was telling me this story that his job hired a district manager that was a black man. And they said we had to give him the job because the people at corporate at Pepsi said we needed to have opportunities for, other cultures and other backgrounds. And he got the job. And he's complaining about the diversity hire. So then I start to poke and I'm like, well, does he suck at the job? He's like, nah, actually, he's really good. And some of his ideas are great. And I'm like, so what the fuck's the problem? And he's like, well, they should have given it to the best person. And I'm like, how many people got the job before him? He's like, well, he's the third person. And I'm like, how long has he had the job? And he's like, 6 months. And I was like, what about the 2 guys before him? He's like, well, they lasted 30 days. And then 1 guy lasted 2 weeks. And I'm like, so you would say that 6 months, he's doing a great job. He's making good changes. He was the best man for the job. And without the program, he wouldn't be there. He wouldn't be giving you that. Right? So like sometimes we don't even know if the person of color, we don't even know if a passing Latino is good for the job because they don't get the opportunity, right? Like me and my dad, we look the same, like, God rest his soul, but we look the same. We look like what you would say we're white. Ethnicity and race are 2 different things. We are white Latinos. In our culture, or in American culture, it's called a passing Latino. We are passing. My dad always told me, you get a manager job, if you got to get there and you got to be as white as rice to get that spot, go get it. And you know why? Because when you get there, then you can take care of people like us. You can put a Dominican man in a role. You can put a black woman in this role because you know what it's like to struggle. You know what it's like to have to hide who you are. Right? And it was just one of those things like, we need to provide opportunities for other people. So the diversity hire, to me, I think is essential. Now, the problem I have with it is, unfortunately, and like Adolfo, you can attest because you live closest to there, is some of the cops in New York City, they've been given these opportunities and they're not great at the job. They get the job because to them, it's just like a job, like going to McDonald's. Like they're not actually like trying to be passionate about the job. And we're not talking about like injustice. We're not doing that right now. What we are talking about is like, some of the cops in New York City that I've seen, like when I go to Yankee Stadium with my son, is like, these dudes don't even look like they like their job. They look like they're just there to cash a paycheck. That's not somebody I want protecting the streets. That's not somebody where I want protecting me in case something goes down at Yankee Stadium. Like I want a guy who's passionate, who wants to be a police officer there. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what I feel. But yeah, I feel like diversity hires is essential. And Adolfo, I do agree with you. I have worked with people that have been given opportunities that have taken advantage of the system, where they've said, I got this job because of what I am, because of what I look like, because of what my name is. And I'm just taking the money. I'm just taking the paycheck. And it's like, but you don't like doing this? No, this is just like a stepping stone for me to get to what I need to be. And it's like, okay, but now you took the job from somebody who could really, who's it would really benefit. That is the part where I feel like that's the issue. But what I will say, and this is just from my experience, and I can't speak for you guys, is that happens less than half the time. Like that, a quarter of the time. I think that I've experienced that maybe like once or twice in my life. Like the things I experience is like, hey, this guy or this girl for this job, like they are actually amazing. You know what I mean? Like, so like that's kind of one of the things that I wanted to say. Like I come from a field, which is now where I'll say is like, I've been a butcher since I was 17 years old, right? I started in ShopRite in Bayonne, New Jersey. That was the first time I put a knife in my hand, or that somebody put a knife in my hand that taught me about breaking down stuff. In my lifetime, until I was 26, so at 17 to 26, I had never seen a female butcher. I had never seen a Latino butcher. And I had rarely seen like an African-American, a black person be a butcher. It was always white, middle-aged white men, right? And I just, it's one of those things where it's like when I became a manager at the age of 27, I trained the first female butcher in my job. Like, and I trained the first Puerto Rican that worked for my company that wasn't me. Like, that's what you have to do. Like, I followed my dad's like thing. Like, you have to give that opportunity to the next person, and you have to take it seriously. And the reason I bring that up is because the next thing I wanted to talk about is something that WWE does, which I find very frustrating. And I want to hear from both of you because I think you're both fans of the one person that sparks the conversation. But we forever hear WWE is looking for the next Eddie Guerrero, right? How many times have we read that rumor? How many times have we heard that rumor? How many times have we seen Dave Meltzer talk about it? WWE is looking for the next Eddie Guerrero. And then they get a Latino star, and then they turn him into a joke. Like, Eddie wasn't a joke. Eddie was important to the culture, right? So how does it feel for you guys to hear that great rumor, to get excited that we're going to get somebody that's like us from our background, and then they get that spot, and then they get thrown into the League of Nations, which is essentially a group to just build up Roman Reigns, or they get, like, you know, the LWO treatment, where it's like, let's bring back this group that wasn't taken care of in WCW, right? It wasn't. And then it comes to WWE, and then it gets treated like a jobber group, right? And what does that feel like for you guys when you see that, when you're like, oh, we're finally going to get that future Latino star, and then we get a bunch of Latinos in the role, but then they're there to as enhancement talent. They're there as a comedy act. What does that feel like to you, being from our background and seeing that? Mikey, why don't you go first?
Okay. This is the good stuff we're going to be talking about here. So this is where I come from this. Again, thankfully, you know, specifically talking about WWE, you mentioned the LWO. And when we do our WWE reviews on Sundays, you know, Sunday mornings, it frustrates all three of us. So myself, Minnie, and the professor, it frustrates us to no end because, again, there's always this weird thing, like, not to say that it's a certain individual's fault or any one person to blame, but I'm going to use Dragon Lee as an example, right? So outside of WWE, anybody who follows Lucha Libre in general knows that in Lucha Libre, Dragon Lee has a pedigree that is very well respected in the sport and well respected in Mexico, like all that jazz. Look it up. His story is very interesting. When I heard he was getting signed to NXT like 2 or 3 years ago, I got excited because I was familiar with the name. I know the lineage that he comes from. My grandma would always talk about, you know, the family history behind, you know, him and his pedigree. And when he came to NXT, I was super excited. And Shawn Michaels did a pretty good job of showcasing what he can do. Like, he was part of one of my favorite matches 2 years ago in that fatal 5-way for the North American Championship at Stand and Deliver when, you know, WrestleMania was out here in LA. Like, that was a fantastic match, and he competed. You know, he was a North American champion. He had some really fun matches, like him and Dominic was a really fun match. You know, prior to being let go, we were getting Dragon Lee versus Mustafa Ali, which would have been great. And then when he got pushed to the main roster, you know, I had a little bit of hope. We put him with Rey Mysterio. I was like, okay, I mean, we don't need to put all the Latinos into LWO, but hey, you know what? This is exciting. We're going to get lots of Latino action on, you know, Monday Night Raw. We're going to see them, or at that time, SmackDown. And then they were treated as cannon fodder for everything else on SmackDown. Then they got drafted to Raw, and I was like, okay, let's see what Raw is going to do with them. And they still get treated like cannon fodder. I get frustrated because everyone wants to either make the next Eddie Guerrero or the next Rey Mysterio, especially if you're a luchador. Or, and you know, even to take it back, like looking at Axiom, you're going to take somebody like A-Kid, who is not a luchador, from NXT UK, from, you know, Spain and all that good stuff, and you put a mask on him. I'm like, Was that really necessary? You really couldn't have A Kid just be A Kid. You're going to turn him into a luchador by putting a mask on him. Like, what was this? Now, granted, I have moved past that because at least A Kid / Axiom continues to show that he's a fantastic wrestler and I love him to death. But I get frustrated because we have yet to have a Latino champion outside of Damian. But even then, when we talk about him, I'm going to have my critiques and my opinions of it, because I also feel like Damian hasn't been given the correct treatment up until now, too, which we'll get into when we get to. I think Damian's probably the closest we're getting to the next Eddie Guerrero. But I'm also the mindset, why can't he just be the first Damian Priest? Why do we always have to continue to put Latino wrestlers into pre-existing templates? Let them be the first of their, character and in their individual. And it's not just in WWE, because I have a bone to pick with other promotions too. Some good, some bad. But yeah, specifically talking to WWE, using Dragon Lee as an example, I get frustrated because we continue to try to put Latino wrestlers into these pre-existing templates instead of letting them create a template of their own and to get themselves over as themselves rather than the next Eddie or the next Rey. So I tag in Adolfo in this one because I can go on forever.
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, the TLDR, it makes me mad. Eddie Guerrero was Latino. He was a great wrestler, right? Like, I remember watching him in WCW, and then when he went to WWE, I remember watching those matches and being like, he is a fantastic wrestler. He tells such a great story in the ring. I feel that this speaks to a bigger problem that more specifically WWF had. And I bring this up because I have to shout out FD Signifier, who's a YouTuber whom I watch, and he did this 1.5 hour long special on black wrestlers, right? But he kind of, brought up certain facts that, wrestling is about characters, right? And when Vince McMahon started the WWF and started pulling in and gobbling up all these smaller promotions, everyone had to do it his way, because in these smaller promotions, you did have a black champion, you did have Latinos that wrestled and they weren't a stereotype, but then you bring the Vince factor into it, right? Number one, it was his way or the highway, right? Number two, he had the money to give you. So we all know wrestling is a tough career. You know what I mean? So if someone's going to, start tossing tons and tons of money at you, yeah, you're going to be more susceptible to listen to the ideas, even if they are pretty shitty, and that was, Vince's thing, where all of, look back at Tito Santana, he had that whole Matador thing, back in the 80s. Who were your big bad guys? You had Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik, super problematic, stereotypical, right? And even now it's hard. I'm gonna use both big promotions, but I feel like it's more in WWE. It's hard to break away from just having a Latino wrestler, a black wrestler, Indian wrestler. They all have to have these stereotypical roles put on them, like Axiom, he's from Spain. But, he's a wrestler, but he's not a luchador. And, oh, you're Spanish, you're a luchador, So Eddie Guerrero, that Latino heat, for like as entertaining at the time as it was still so, it hurt me. Like, and again, this is one of those times where like I had to keep everything to myself, but it hurt me to see that this individual who had such talent had to be relegated to this stereotypical nonsense role, and could never even fathom going for a title. You know what I mean? Because he was going to get lost in the shuffle. And now, fast forward to nowadays, where you have people saying, "Oh, the next Eddie Guerrero, the next Eddie Guerrero." No, like, stop, right? To quote Ben Solo from Star Wars, "Let the past die." You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying forget him, or forget all those great wrestlers that came before us, but let these new, it's a new age. Let these new young wrestlers coming in be themselves and not have to worry about fitting into that, into that mold, being the next Eddie Guerrero, being the next, Booker T, whatever, what have you. You know what I mean? As it is, we have Dom Mysterio. He's like totally copping off of Eddie, and he's being really successful about it. So like, if we're looking at it as like an homage type thing, let Dom do that. He's doing a great job doing that. Hell, he was there like during that whole freaking like custody battle nonsense. You know what I mean? It was over him. So sure, let him take that mantle. But as a new wrestler coming in, if they're Latino, if they're Black, if they're whatever, let them be themselves. This is why I worried when Stephanie Vaquer made the jump to WWE, right? And this is why I'm worried when Penta and Rey Fenix make the jump to WWE. That they are going to eventually, once like creative or whatever, like can't figure out what to do with them and doesn't want to put gold on them, because God's forbid, then they're going to get wrapped up into like an LWO, background jobbing type thing. And like, if that happens to Stephanie Vaquer, that's terrible. Like, again, I get it. I know why she went, and I'm happy for her because that was her dream, and now she's getting that money. You know what I mean? At the same time, like, treat her right because she's, fantastic. The same thing with Penta and Rey Fenix. Like, they're going to come in and they're going to put on matches that WWE fans have probably never seen in their life, and they're going to be great matches. Treat them right, though. Don't start jobbing them off. When I started watching wrestling again, and I started watching AEW, and Mikey, this for a while, this was like just like we should have put like record ourselves saying it and just like hit a button every other week, where like it was cool in AEW to see all these luchadors, the Pentas, the Phoenix, the Commanders, right? But then like week in and week out, they just got jobbed out and jobbed out and jobbed out, and it gets so frustrating, especially when you see like in recent Atlantis Junior, right? When he wrestles in CMLL, he's fantastic. Yeah, completely different. When they bring him up for ROH or AEW, it's like, yeah, heck, even Asuka, right?
Rocky Romero.
Rocky Romero. When he's down in CMLL, he's a completely different wrestler, and he's dynamic, and he's got character, and he puts it all out, and it's an entertaining match, right? But then, for whatever reason, when they put him into an AEW or an ROH ring, he's just like quiet, meek.
It's very like levels are down and everything.
Yeah.
It's nuts, and it's not just AEW. WWE does this a lot. And as much as I love them, I'm like the only two hosts here who love them. But even I have problems when I look at TNA. I'm like, now granted, TNA is doing a really good job with Mike Santana. Like, I am a ride or die for Mr. Michael Santana, man. Like, growing up in New York, being Puerto Rican and not being unafraid to be that, like part of one of the biggest tag teams in TNA history with LAX, like, that is my dude. I ride or die for him. TNA is doing a really good job with him, but I'm also looking at TNA. I was like, don't mess this up, you guys. We don't have too many Latin superstars in TNA right now outside of Mike Santana. And, you know, I'm just like, don't mess this up. But to speak to what you're saying, Adolfo, is like, yeah, I'm just like, I don't know why the Latin talent in general, or, you know, they used to do this a lot to the African-American talent, but that's kind of like not as prevalent now. But now it's the Latinos and Latinas' turn to get jobbed out. Like, the amount of times I wanted to throw things at my television screen anytime I saw Zelina Vega get jobbed out, I'm just like, why are we doing this to Zelina? Don't do this to my queen. I love her so much. But yeah, I don't understand why.
And the Japanese talent too, it seems like.
Don't even get me started. Like, remember when Asuka got jobbed out when she came up to main roster for a little bit? I'm like, what are we doing? I don't get it. I don't understand why. And again, this is a culmination of things. Let these stars be the first of their, you know, wrestlers' legacy instead of trying to fill a template. But also, don't be afraid to pull the trigger. Yes, I know we got long-term storytelling. We got to build them up correctly. But give them something to do. How come? And it doesn't even need to be like a crazy big overarching like 20 chapter plot that needs to happen. Like, now listen, I might be stirring up some feelings here, and I don't care. I will be alone in this statement. Like, even though the feud was very short, the reason that I was screaming and crying when Penta and Rey won the AEW Tag Team Championships from the Bucks in that steel cage match 3 years ago at All Out was because the feud leading into it, it was not only who was the best tag team, but Penta and Rey were representing the lucha libre that the Bucks were copying, and that was part of the storyline too. And, you know, at the end of the day, the Lucha Brothers overthrew the Young Bucks, became the champions, and I was super ecstatic. I was like, finally, I have a champion. And then not long later, we had Thunder Rosa beat Britt Baker and become the AEW Women's Champion. I was like, yes, finally, I get to see my people on top. And then I was like, well, that didn't last very long, because then poor Thunder got hurt. She had to relinquish the title, has never been back in the championship scene since, outside of her match at Dynasty earlier this year against Timeless Toni Storm. The Lucha Brothers, you know, lost the tag titles. Penta and Rey were in and out with injury. Rey was international champion for like 3 weeks, but he was still injured, so he didn't defend it as much. For some reason, we don't use Penta, which I'm like, what is happening? Like, I don't know. We can go on for this, but that is where I am feeling with this, and kind of piggybacking off of what you said, Adolfo. Like, it frustrates me, Macho. It really, really does.
Well, no, that's good. That's why we're here. We're here to air out some grievances with both companies, with any company. And the major thing that I want to say about Stephanie McCourt might be unlucky because she might get labeled as Andrade. Like, Andrade is so good where I've seen this, and I think I've pointed this out on TikTok videos. This man can come out and have zero reaction from the audience. And by the end of the match, the entire arena is chanting, "This is awesome." That's how good Andrade is. That's what I think we'll get with Stephanie. Now, I think they'll do the right thing and they'll treat her more like they treated the newest version of the Nakamura character, where they'll let her have subtitles and they'll just let her be her. I don't think the Lucha Bros will have to deal with this because Penta can speak English. And he reminds me a lot of the way Eddie spoke. You know what I mean? Like, he has that. Plus, and I know that this is just like a weird thing to bring up, but I've said this in like private conversations. The WWE is all about branching out, right? They send Bayley a lot to go visit the 49ers. Like, go over there and they do a lot of stuff. Penta has a tight relationship with the tight end of the 49ers. He makes him masks, Penta masks that
Kittle
have those
literally
Niner colors.
has like wrestling clothing line to go.
Yes.
And I know
So,
that 'cause
like,
my mom's a huge Niner fan.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Kittle's first down is the Penta thing. You know, like, that's his thing. Every time he gets a first down, boom, he drops that. It's immediate. I think that they're going to be super successful. And I think that just because of the whole Rey Fenix thing and him having to stay there because of the injury clause, that's just going to benefit them. Because WWE is not going to let them do all of their stuff. They're going to treat them like the Motor City Machine Guns that we've seen on SmackDown. This isn't the Motor City Machine Guns from TNA. No. They're not doing everything. They're doing what they need to do to get over, and that's what WWE will do. They will put them in the right position, and they'll probably go right to the main roster.
They are still fantastic, too. I love
yes,
them
absolutely.
So
they are phenomenal. But, yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of those things. But the one thing I wanted to touch on here is, and I think this is a very personal thing to me, and I actually don't think that I've shared this part with Mikey. But we actually have, and I told Mikey before I was going to tell a personal story here, and I'll be as brief as possible because I really want you guys to dissect what I'm about to say. When, like I told you, I was a butcher since I was 17. I actually remember being really good at my job, and I still am. I'm still very good at what I do. But I remember the company I worked for learned that I was Puerto Rican. And they immediately made it known that I would never move up because their experience with Latinos, their experience with people of colors is that we don't do well in manager roles, right? And I remember leaving to go to another company to be a butcher for a competitor. And I told them, I went in and I said, listen, I can do specialty cuts. If you needed to bring in deer from hunting season, I can butcher it from nose to tail. I can do everything, and I bring my own clients with me, meaning that you're going to get the money, but they're coming here for my knife work. And you need to know from the beginning, I will not hide that. I am going to show you that because that is a part of me. That is where I'm from. The company I went to, they embraced me with open arms. A predominantly white company. No people of color on like in any prominent positions, no Latinos anywhere, right? And they gave me the opportunity to do that because I made sure that I told them it is important to me when you move me up that people know that I'm the first Puerto Rican in your company to get to this far. That matters to me. That is a very important thing to me. That's where I'm from, my entire family, everything. Right? I have two people that are not Puerto Rican that are in my family. They married into the family. My wife and my godfather, Tori, he's Mexican. Only two people. My wife's Irish. And that's it. Everybody else is Puerto Rican. All of our entire ancestry, right? Now, the reason that I share this story with you is because the WWE Undisputed Champion is Cuban. And that man went on a talk show or a podcast like we're doing right now. And he said, I do my best to not show my Cuban culture. He said, my mother is Cuban. I grew up in a Cuban household. his father was accepting of so many things. Are you telling me that being the WWE Undisputed Champion, you don't think that would mean something for the Cuban culture? To have you showcase who you are? No, my guy, you had to leave and dye your hair to hide the fact that you looked Cuban when you had black hair. Because he did look like a kid that, like, he looked like one of the people from the Scarface movie. He didn't look like a Rhodes. I remember thinking from the beginning, before we ever found out that he was Cuban, I remember thinking, like, oh man, he looks Latino. His mom looks very much Latina, like the people that I grew up with, the Cuban people I grew up with. That really bothers me. That's honestly why I can't fuck with Cody Rhodes, because I feel like there's so many things that he does, but like this, hiding yourself, being a Latino, a passing white Latino, Hispanic, that refuses to show your stuff, it's not the same as Karrion Kross. Like, Karrion Kross made it very clear. He said, I was already this character. If I all of a sudden decided to come out one day and show you my Puerto Ricanness, you're not going to see it as authentic because I've never given you that character, right? The American Nightmare is very specific. He is the American Nightmare. He wears red, white, and blue. He dresses like Homelander. It's all about America, right? He wears he said it on his Wheatley thing, his hat. He wears a trucker hat with the American flag on it. He completely hides all of his Cubanness. You have to actually deep dive to research to find this out. And this is this was like the last topic I wanted to touch on with you guys. How do you feel when you find out that someone is Latino in any form of media and they choose to hide it? Because most recently we've just had a very prominent actor, the guy who was the main character on Psych. He's Mexican, and a lot of people don't know this. He hid his last name. His Mexican last name is Rodriguez. He hid it. And then recently he came out and said he's done hiding it. So now his name in full has Rodriguez in it. He made sure to know, like, let people know, like, this is a part of my background. This is my culture. This is how I grew up. So how do you feel when you see someone as prominent as a Cody Rhodes type? And it doesn't have to be Cody. It could be anybody else you want it to be. But how do you feel when you find out that they're hiding their culture, and not because they're afraid of backlash, but because they're choosing to put their career over what they can do for an entire new class of people? I mean, don't just jump in all at once.
No, there's a lot to dissect there.
There are so many layers to this.
It's, yeah, again, TLDR, it's frustrating and angering, that we are at this, we're at this place where an individual feels like they have to hide that part of themselves in order to succeed, right? Cody Rhodes grew up in the business, I want to start off by saying I'm not making any excuses for him. I'm just trying to dissect it. You know what I mean? And I'm coming at this from every angle, again, just because of the this past week. I've been having a lot of conversations with Alice, about this. So I'm gonna get to it. Sorry, I'm rambling. So Cody Rhodes, he grew up in the business, right? So, and he's, especially when it came to Vince McMahon, right, and like what Vince McMahon did to his family, Cody Rhodes might have, knowingly hid that, because had he come out and been like, yeah, I'm Cuban, then fucking Vince would have made him, El Chicanista de Cuba, and he would have to come out where it's like smoking a Cuban cigar and with the fun, and like a tiki-taki, and
like a salsero or something like that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. And then boom, there, any chance of him being, a serious, being looked at as a serious wrestler are gone. you know, especially with that Rhodes name, you know, because yeah, Dustin, you know, Dustin was great, and you know, and then there was Gold Dust, you know what I mean, and like, yeah, now we look back and we're like, that Gold Dust character was, you know, was really good, but at the time, Gold Dust was a joke, right? And you know, that's something that he had to that Cody had to carry, you know. So you know, that probably factored in heavy into his choice of, you know, not saying anything. The other thing too, and I don't know, you know, like any behind the doors or anything about their family, and I'm not speaking bad about Cody, his parents, you know, any of that. But if it's one thing we saw this past week, who hates immigrants more than immigrants themselves? You know what I mean? So there also might have been that as well. You know, I I was lucky because, you know, my even through all the shit that my family went through, like we are proud of being Boricua, you know, we are proud Puerto Ricans. But I can totally see that going the other way. You know, I can totally see, like, you know, my father and my mother sit, like, when I was younger, like sitting me down and being like, you you are not. We do not want you to go through this, right? So you are not. You are Al. You know, there was a huge chunk of my life. There was a huge chunk of my early adult life that I could not go by Adolfo. I had to go by Al. Or I didn't have to, but I just like it got so just I was so beat down that when people asked my name, I was just like, yeah, oh, it's Al. You know, the amount of people that you know that called my dad Joe. You know, he's Jose. Like Jose is difficult to you know to say. No, he's Joe, right? So I can see these different things that would factor into that in Cody Rhodes. Doesn't make it any more frustrating because yes, like that is something that he could take and you know and elevate, like all those young Latino boys that are, you know, that especially now that are sitting thinking that life has to be one some way. You know, he could be like, no, mira, look at me, right? You don't have to follow that path. You know what I mean? I'm one with you. I am one of you, right? And to know that like he's actively not doing that is frustrating. You know, at the same time though, like Matt Taven, when he came out as Puerto Rican during Latino Heritage Month, that was totally, you know, totally cool, right? But you know, and yeah, his character in the United Kingdom doesn't really play that way, right? But like I feel like having him come out like that, having him come out, it's kind of like the same thing. You know, he could have not just said that for Latino Heritage Month. You know, he could have like, yeah, I am Puerto Rican, and like, you know, I don't know, like work the Puerto Rican flag into his ring gear or something like that. You know what I mean? Or and I don't know, maybe I'm missing it on social media, but like I, you know, have he could talk about it more. And again, you know, be there for the youth, for the young men that are very confused at this time, this very tumultuous time right now, and need a beacon like that to be like, yo, no, like, look at me, I am one of you, and it doesn't have to be that way. You know what I mean? So I'm done.
Yeah, before Mikey, before you go, I want to read you the quote that Cody actually said about being Cuban, so you can, because you're a lot smarter than me, so you'll be able to dissect it a lot better. But he said, "I remember one time I clicked a picture of a Cuban for Spanish for Cuba for Spanish Heritage Month, and I took a picture, and it was me in the photo as Stardust, and people were upset. So I hide that part of me. Now, this upsets me for so many reasons. One, you're a big star, and two, Stardust is my favorite version of Cody Rhodes, personally, because I grew up a Gold Dust fan. I had an uncle, and you know how us Puerto Ricans are. We be naming we give weird nicknames to our family members. So my uncle's his name's Edwin, but I called him Uncle Titty, right? Like that was his nickname. And I remember when he told me, because I grew up with Dustin Reynolds. Like I was a fan of that Super Brawl match when it was him and he tagged with Sting, who's my favorite wrestler ever, and Flying Brian Pillman against Stone Cold, stunning Steve Austin, ravishing Rick Rude and Paul Orndorff. Like that is one of my favorite cage matches ever. I'm a massive Dustin fan. I always have been. So when my Uncle Titty told me, like, you know who Goldust is, right? And I was like, no. And he's like, that's Dusty's son. That's Dustin. And I was little. I was a little boy when he told me that. And I remember just being like, oh, that's it. That's my guy. Remember the Jax figures, right? I went to Toys R Us immediately with my dad and I bought a Goldust figure. He mattered that much to me because I'm a WCW guy. Like that's my company. That's the company I rocked with. And so when Stardust came out, I was like, here we go. We're finally going to get the Dust character as a WWE champion. Unfortunately, he didn't think so. And he quit the company because they wouldn't take him out of the makeup. So whatever. But yeah, just finding this out, Mikey, knowing that his reasoning is that people got upset that he would prefer to hide his cultural background because it upsets people. What do you think about that now, knowing that coupled with the information I said?
So I'm probably going to make a lot of people mad, but I am going to, but this is the path I choose to travel anyways, and I'm going to stick by it. And, I'm going to address both sides because I see both sides, and then ultimately I'll give you my conclusion at the very end. So I want to briefly talk about a quick short story to kind of begin this. So I mentioned at the beginning of this when we were talking about, for me personally, growing up looking for individuals that looked like me, maybe not 100%, but as a child of the 90s, I grew up always wanting to see me in any media that was being portrayed and, showing these characters. Now, as a kid in the 90s, there weren't too many like Latino characters in cartoons or movies or any medium like that outside of the stereotypical joke characters of, with the Mexicans, the stereotypical Mexican character wearing the sombrero and the, baracha and all that. And then also, Puerto Ricans didn't exist to me in the 90s, unfortunately. So as a kid, cartoons were my thing that I gravitated towards to find some resemblance of me. And I always joke about this and, I laugh about it, but these two shows have a special place in my heart because they truly started me down this path of wanting more when it comes to people being proud of who they are. And that goes to the Proud Family and to also, for me, Static Shock. Those two cartoons growing up in the 90s and the 2000s were one of the things that showed me that I want more for when it comes to this. Proud Family had all types of characters from all walks of life. You had Penny Proud and Sticky and Dijonay representing the different parts of African American culture. La Cienega Boulevardes was the Latin representation. The Chang triplets. Like, there was a lot of diverse. And then you had the white girl Zoe. Like, watching all these people come together, I'm like, hey, this looks like my friend group. But then Static Shock showing me, hey, Static understands, the power of like racism and skin color and class and all that. Like, Static Shock and Proud Family weren't afraid to address these things in a format that kids would understand. Now, fast forwarding and what that has to do with this conversation, I think it's a disservice for Cody to hide that from people. And this is coming from somebody who loves Cody Rhodes to death. Macho knows this very, very well. I will ride or die for Cody, but he is not beyond critique. So, but I am a big fan of Cody Rhodes. It's disheartening to hear that is a choice that he makes, because then it's such an inauthentic to who they are, and not in the same vein, but also, I ride or die for Matt Taven before because he's a great, phenomenal wrestler. He's Puerto Rican, which adds like a little extra point, but it shouldn't be the thing. And it's disheartening that wrestlers feel like they have to hide those things, because there are wrestlers who are just out and about 100% themselves, and they don't really care. Again, I brought him up earlier, but to me, the best example would be Mike Santana. Mike Santana is unapologetically Puerto Rican and, spinning the block on people left and right. Like, this man knows where he came from. He knows where he grew up, and it is a part of who he is. It's not just something as a character choice. It's literally who he is. And of course, Mike Santana's story is amazing, as I talk about too. Is that from that, he is in the world of professional wrestling, and he's killing it in TNA right now. So there's it's such an authentic thing for people like Mike Santana, or even, one of my other favorites too, Miss Thunder Rosa. Like, she is unapologetically repping her culture left and right. Literally last week, and Adolfo, me and you talked about this because we weren't sure how AEW was going to handle this Day of the Dead match that we got between her and Harley Cameron. But it was really, even though it was a gimmick match, like, it wasn't disrespectful, it wasn't everything. And Thunder is always representing her culture every time she steps into that ring, whether it's through her face paint, through her ring gear, through the things that she does in promos, but going back and forth in Spanish. Like, there are wrestlers who I gravitate to because they are not afraid to show, this is my culture, this is who I am. And it disheartens me when wrestlers hide those facts from them. On the flip side, however, and I think this is where I'm probably going to get a little bit of heat for this, while I don't necessarily agree with the choices like a Cody Rhodes or Matt Taven or any other wrestlers, specifically Latin wrestlers that hide their heritage, from fans and public and like that, while I don't necessarily agree with it 100% of the time, I can at least be understanding in where possibly, because I've also heard wrestlers say, hey, I'm authentically myself, but there's such a danger when we as fans want to put these individuals into being the poster children for this is what the standard should be, because I feel like that's something that we need to hold the companies accountable for rather than the individual wrestlers themselves. And we see it all the time when it comes to different superstars in different mediums, like in the music industry. There's a lot of individuals that have these big fan bases, but also, as we've seen as time has gone on, sometimes these individuals, they get held up to such a high standard that when they become the poster children, and then they're human, so they're going to make mistakes, then the downfall is just as crazy. All to say this, I think wrestlers should always authentically be themselves. It is 2024. I feel like there's no excuse to be true to your authentic self. That shouldn't even be a conversation right now. However, on the other side of things, I understand that maybe hiding those things because you don't want to be the face of it, because once somebody puts a face to it, then people hold these things to a standard, and that's a whole other set of problems. But where I'm coming from with all of this, to kind of end my little thesis statement, if you will, I think wrestlers shouldn't be afraid to be their authentic self, but I also think that it's not 100% on them to do so. And I understand maybe they don't want to for the reasons that they do, But you shouldn't come out and say things like that, because then it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth when it comes to that. Like, if those are the kinds of conversations you have on, in your bedroom, at the living room of your house, like, that's cool. And I'm not knocking Cody Rhodes for saying what he said. Like, I mean, you are entitled to your opinion, and that is what he stated, and that is his opinion, and I'm not going to hate on him for it. However, because you are on such a level, you are literally the men's champion in a wrestling company. So you are in the top of the card and all eyes are on you. I think there needs to be a way where you just don't come off as being inauthentic, I guess is the best way to put it when you talk about these things. And so I am a big Cody fan. I've said this at the very beginning, but I feel that Cody could have went about it a different way, because the way that he stated it just left a bad taste in my mouth. And I'm a little disappointed in Mr. Rhodes over there. So I'll have to say, I think wrestlers should be able to be authentic and they shouldn't have to hide for they are. However, I think there is a way to go about it to where you can find the balance. But Cody, you are literally the face, and I put this in air quotes, you are literally on all the promotional material for WWE. And everything I see for the posters of all the PLEs, I always see you, I see Roman, I see Bianca. Like, there are certain wrestlers that are staples when the promotional materials come out. Justice for Bayley, I'm just putting that out there, but that's a whole different conversation. But Cody, as the head of the company, I think that you are in a position to set a standard and to kind of be able to set the company down a different path than what has been for the last 20 some odd years that a certain other person was in charge of. And I think you can definitely be the charge to lead WWE into that direction. But the ball's in Cody's court. And so I'm hoping that as he continues on, it will change. But yeah, this kind of left me disappointed. And that's where I kind of am with the whole thing. I understand where Cody's coming from, but I think there was a whole different way that we could have addressed the issue, because it left a bad taste in my mouth.
Go ahead, Adolfo.
And I agree with everything that Mikey elucidated. Very nice. I see there's my smart word for the day. But I need to ask this. And this is now I'm delving into a little controversy here. A majority of your WWE demographic is white. Would they accept Cody Rhodes as Cuban Cody Rhodes?
Yes.
You think?
Yes, because The Rock is Samoan and he's never hid from his African American side. He's very proud to be black. He's made it very clear. I am Samoan. I come from this dynasty, right? He comes from that lineage. But he makes sure that everyone that will listen knows my dad is Rocky Soul Man Johnson. And The Rock is actually, like, he's talked about, people forget about it sometimes. They say it's Booker T or they say it's Bobby Lashley, and Bobby Lashley had to correct people about this. People try to hide it for Rocky. And Bobby actually talked about it when they asked, how do you feel about being the first black WWE champion? And he's like, I wish I could say I was the first, but The Rock was the first. Right? So I feel like the world accepted The Rock, knowing, right? Just like in the 80s, they accepted Doug Williams being the first black quarterback to win the Super Bowl for the Washington Redskins. The way they've accepted Patrick Mahomes now is like the quickest quarterback to ever make it to the GOAT status. Like, the world has moved on, and I think Cody would be fully accepted, especially because, and I know this is going to sound really like weird, but growing up the way I did, like, Cuban people are considered kind of white. Like, it's not really like, they're Hispanic, right? But like, most Cuban people look like Cody. Like, I know we talked about like what does a Puerto Rican look like, but it's very rare that I've ever met someone like an Aroldis Chapman, right? Or like Orlando Hernandez, like the old pitcher for the Yankees, like El Duque. Most people from the Cuban background look like Al Pacino's Scarface. That's what they look like. So Cody would have been that beacon for these people, but at the same time, he could still be the American Nightmare, just without hiding that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, he could do what Matt Taven did. They asked wrestlers in WWE to talk about Hispanic Heritage Month, but he didn't do it. He could have said something. It was a one-on-one interview where the guy that was interviewing him was a Puerto Rican dude who wanted to have this conversation, and Cody's like, "Nah, man, I hide that shit. Like, it makes people angry." Like, no, it does. Like, it made people angry back then, but it's different now. Papa, you're the face of the company, like Mikey said. Now is the time to actually show yourself, to be like, this is it. I'm the guy now. Like, I'm the guy. Like, I just took this shit from Roman Reigns. I'm the face of this company now. I'm the quarterback. Just because you know that I'm Hispanic doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden going to take my championship from me. That's not going to happen. No way. They didn't take the title off The Rock when he was telling people he was black. You know what I mean? Like, people accepted it. They were excited. They moved forward. And I just, and especially because of the way he talks about The Rock meaning so much to his, what he does in professional wrestling, it's just like, so take a page out of The Rock's book.
Fair. Okay.
I think that I'm trying to word this carefully because I don't want to come off sounding very pretentious when I say this, but I think that I agree with Macho. I think a lot of fans would be behind a Cuban Cody Rhodes. That was a part of his American Nightmare character, and he wasn't hiding that. Of course, there's going to be weirdos out there that are going to be so anti, oh my gosh, I can't believe it because he's not a white man. I was like, listen, wrestling should be for everybody, but if you go and bring that kind of energy to this, you can kind of just stay. You could just stay over there. Like, in the words of Kendrick Lamar, they ain't like us. Like, like, what is happening? However, yeah, I mean, for the most part, I agree. I think most people would be behind a Cody Rhodes. There'd be the weirdos that do. But I feel that there's no perfect answer to it because in a perfect world, yes, everyone would be behind it. But because wrestling encompasses so many different ethnicities and cultures and races too, and, just depending on the individual and how they do, I think Cody would have an easier time if he rolled with it. I think that's the best way to put it. And I think a majority of WWE would be behind it. But then it also gets into the fact that, again, like I talked about too, Cody's at the top card, and I think he could probably get away with more than maybe some other wrestlers in that position can do. But I also think it's important that as a company, the internal company of WWE needs to look at what kind of company and what direction they want to head with their superstars. And, it just depends because, again, going back to what Macho said at the very beginning of this, if we look at all our WWE champions outside of Jade, and so I hate to say this, but I don't want to say keeping NXT as an exception, but if we're looking at the main roster specifically, Raw and SmackDown, outside of Jade and Bianca, all your other champions are either white or Caucasian persuasion descent. Like Gunther, European, Liv, and Liv fans, please don't come for me. Like, she looks white presenting if she is anything else.
That's a white girl. She's a white girl.
Okay. Like, I needed somebody to say it because I'm like very careful of how I say it. Over on SmackDown, Cody is our men's champion. You have, Nia Jax is. I need people to stop coming for Nia. Like, that's a whole other conversation. I'm like, leave that poor woman alone. Nothing she ever does is good enough for you. Like, why are we tearing Samoan and black women down? Which is another conversation. But you have LA Knight, who's our United States champion. You have Braun Breaker as our Intercontinental champion. Majority of our champions on the main roster are white. Then I look over at NXT, and there's a reason why Shawn Michaels kind of has my heart a little bit of the three brands of WWE, because at least Shawn Michaels does his best to utilize a diversity of champions. Trick is the men's champ. Roxanne Perez is the women's champ. You have, our North American champion and Tony D'Angelo. Axiom and Nathan Frazier are the tag champs. I mean, Kalani Jordan was our women's North American champion, but now it's Fallon Henley. The thing is, and I love Triple H, I really do, but NXT will always hold a special place in my heart because Shawn Michaels is not afraid to let other people be champions outside of what we normally get to see when it comes to our champs. Hell, looking at AEW right now, we outside of Private Party now, the majority of the champs are heels and a majority of the champs are white for a certain extent.
You're also talking about a man in Shawn Michaels who broke character on an episode of Monday Night Raw to give flowers to Shelton Benjamin, who interrupted. Shelton's talked about this. Shawn was not a part of that promo backstage. He interrupted that promo to give that man his flowers for the match that they just had. A match that he won, by the way. And he still put that man over. So Shawn has kind of always been, there's a reason he's the Michael Jordan of professional wrestling. Like, there's just a reason that he's just better at everything.
And that kind of brings back to my point that I'm making here is that I think that the wrestlers themselves, especially Cody being at the top of the card, has a perfect position to do whatever he wants. But also, it's the people who are running the rosters as well that should utilize and capitalize, so to speak, on being able to do something different. Because, look, I love Triple H, but Triple H tends to play it safe a lot. And that's not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to certain things, but Triple H has the ability to do something crazy on main roster. And I think that's what I'm seeing. And I think that's why I will always root and get on the megaphone for NXT, because NXT to me is my favorite brand of the three. I love all the superstars across all three, but NXT just holds a special place for me because they're not afraid to do something different and to lead the charge for something different. And I think that has to be what the people in charge of main roster and NXT need to do, and just the company as a whole. You have the talent here. You need to figure out a way to capitalize and utilize them better, because you literally, and I'm using this because she's my personal favorite and she could do no wrong in my eyes, but literally Bianca Belair is probably one of my personal favorites because she is also authentically Black herself. Everything she does is for the culture. Literally, I cried during her entrance at WrestleMania when it was at SoFi because, she brought out the dance team, the Comptons of Diva, like the all Black girl dance team to be with her. She brought out the HBCU bands when they were in WrestleMania in Texas. Like, do you know how cool that shit is for me to watch this as a grown-ass adult? Be like, man, that is amazing. Like 10 years ago, I would never have seen that. And I bring up Bianca to say is that every wrestler could do that for kids and adults from all creeds and, cultures and things like that. But not just WWE, but it seems that a lot of these companies, they use these moments as the exception and not the standard. And I think that's where I'm coming from, is I think these things needs to start becoming the standards rather than the exception to the rule. And that all tallies back. It was like, Cody, you shouldn't have to hide these things. You should make it be a standard and not the exception just because you're at the top spot. This should be everyone's mindset. Of course, not everyone thinks that way, but I think that if companies decided to make that the standard, I think we would have less problems of these kinds of issues. Again, that's me in a perfect world. Understand that that's not the world we live in, but things need to be a standard, not an exception. That's where I'm coming from is all.
One last thing about this Cody Rhodes thing, which I just thought of, and it's because of what you said, Mikey, because you brought up NXT. Currently, we have a Cuban star in NXT. And she is being touted as the Ronda Rousey. She's being touted as like this star who's going to come in and she's going to dominate when she gets to the main roster.
I love it.
She's Cubana to a fault. Like she lets you know.
She will fight you.
And I'm talking about Lola Vice and how much more do you think it would how much more do you think it would mean to her in twofold? One, because she's a woman, right? And the other one is because she's Cuban. That the fact that the face of the company is proud and showing his background to the world. And then you know how we do it. Like I know specifically for me with a Puerto Rican wrestler, when I find out they're Puerto Rican, I'm like, well, hold on, I need to know more about you. Like when I watch a movie or I watch something like that, like I need to know more about you. I need to know why, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I want to know more. Like I remember I'm not a musical theater kid, but I love like musicals. Like I loved Grease, you know, and things like that. And when I found out that Anthony Ramos was Puerto Rican and from Hamilton, I was like, oh, hold on a minute. And then I downloaded his album off Spotify. And then I was like, oh, well, this is my guy. I went to go see Twisters because I heard he had a prominent role in it. You see what I mean? Like what it does to people like us? Like he's not like a major like actor yet. He's getting there, right? But he's not major yet. But to know that for me, we talked about it before the show, like finding out that the Fast and the Furious family, finding out that Toretto's are like Puerto Rican. That's a big deal to me. I shared that shit with my brother-in-law. I told him, I texted him, I was like, did you know Dom was Puerto Rican? That's great. We have the same car. I drive a Dodge Charger. Like, this is awesome. You know what I mean? Like, I'm 40. I shouldn't be talking like that. That's how kids talk. But it matters to me. So it would matter to people. I feel like it would matter to people if they found that out too.
I agree. You know, and this is the type of conversation, of course, because we could continue to have this type of conversation on a whole bunch of other things, but definitely this is not going to be the last in the series because there are so many other things that we can discuss when it comes to this. And honestly, I think this is probably because you asked the final question with it comes to all that. I think this is a really good stopping point because now I want to continue the conversation. But I'm like, we could go on for hours, but I think what we should do is the three of us will talk and maybe convince some of the other folks who want to be a part of this as well. But I definitely want to continue to have conversations like this on this platform. And it goes back to everything that has been said tonight. I think, and this is just from me because I can't speak for Adolfo and Macho and the rest of my BC WrestlePod crew, but this is for me as the boss, as the leader, whatever you want to call it. I am very grateful and I am very blessed to be in the position that I am. Granted that we are still working our asses off to get to where we want this thing to be, but we put in all the work and I cannot commend my crew, both, you know, who've been rocking with me since day one to the newer folks who are here. Like we've busted our asses to get where we are. And I feel privileged to be in this space amongst some other folks that I respect in this wrestling review game. But I also think that it's important because we have such a platform like this. I think it's important that these kinds of conversations need to happen because the other constituents don't necessarily have to have these conversations because they look like a majority of folks here in the Western United States. And I'm not saying I'm anti-white or anti, you know, anything like that because I love my white folks. Okay, like I have some cool folks. They cool with me. I rock with them. You know, I love them to death, but they can only relate to me and my other hosts here to us only to a certain extent because of just the way that, you know, the society that we live in has been built up over centuries. On to say that Macho, I thank you for allowing, you know, us to participate in this idea that you had and to have this conversation this evening. And we will definitely be continuing to talk about more stuff like this because we have the platform to do so. So why not?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say thank you to both of you so much. This means a lot to me. I've always wanted to have this conversation, and I mean, I have a friend that I do like the Must Love Wrestling podcast with, and like I can't have this conversation with him, not because he, not because he wouldn't understand, but he just can't. Like it's not really a conversation he can actually be a part of. So I just want to say thank you so much to you guys. I really appreciate you. There's a lot of pride coming out in this, you know, and for the people that, you know, watched our show here, watched what we did, you know, gracias a todo. You know, this is definitely one of the coolest podcasts that I've ever been a part of, and I really appreciate both of you for being a part of it.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, I agree with Macho. I thank you too for being here, and for everyone watching, thank you for allowing us to have this conversation. And just let us know what you feel about this conversation and other things you would love to see this special series to kind of talk about and hit and whatnot. Definitely, I want to keep this series going now that we've had this. So, but we're going to wrap this up for this evening. So, thank you so much for tuning in to this first edition of the BC WrestlePod special reports, if you will. Don't know when we're going to do the next one, but we'll figure it out as a crew because I definitely want to continue this. But until then, thank you so much for tuning in. From all of us here at BC WrestlePod, remember, take care of yourself, love one another, stay biconic, and more importantly than anything, you always deserve to finish your story. We will catch you next time, but until then, sayonara, adios, and we'll talk to you later.